I'm Glenn Campbell in the woods of Tennessee to talk to you about the sunk cost fallacy. That's an obscure term for a really common defect of reasoning that leads you to a whole host of stupid mistakes. And these are the kind of mistakes you make over time, over weeks and months and years, where you have invested in something, it's just not working out for you, but you continue to do it simply because you've already spent so much. The simplest example is an investor who buys an asset, like a stock. Let's say he paid $100 for it. If the price goes up, he's going to sell the stock and make a profit. But what happens if the price goes down? Will he sell? Logically, all that matters is the price right now and the future prospects. But people tend to behave as though the universe owes them something, owes them at least that money they paid. So they tend to hold on to this losing investment longer than they should. I want you to take a look at this exquisite object I just acquired. It's Asian. And my question for you is, how much is it worth? And the common response is, it's worth whatever you paid for it. So if you went to China and you found this in a shop and you paid $50 for it, and you went to all the trouble of transporting it back to your home country, you would consider this very valuable, a valuable heirloom. It's worth $50 plus the importation costs, and you would cherish it as an heirloom. Now, it so happens that I bought this object at a thrift store today for $1. And I will use it as a prop in this video, and then I'll probably give it back to the thrift store when I'm done. It has no great value to me. So the question is, how much is this worth? Who is right? Me or the person who bought this thing in China? It came from the same Chinese sweatshop, right? It has the same materials, it's the same thing. Whose valuation is correct? And this is the essence of the sunk cost fallacy. It is a question of how do you evaluate assets? How do you value assets? The asset can be an object like this. It can be a relationship that you've invested in. It can be a service, something else, real estate that you invested in. The question is, how much is it worth? And the correct answer is, it's worth whatever value you can get out of it right now and into the future. What you paid for it is completely irrelevant, because that's a sunk cost. That is money you've already spent. The sunk cost fallacy is evaluating objects like this, assets like this, by what they cost you. And that's what gets you into trouble, because that means you're going to continue to invest in things to protect this so-called investment, when in fact it really isn't worth what you think it is. This investment effect got me into some hot water in Jamaica last year. I had rented a car in Kingston, and I wanted to drive over the Blue Mountains from one side of the island to the other. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of following Google Maps, which sent me down the wrong road. The wrong road started out pretty good. It was winding, but it was paved, which is all you can really expect of a road in Jamaica. Unfortunately, the pavement gave way to dirt, and eventually the dirt gave way to an unmaintained two-track. It became deeply rutted. I managed to navigate over some of the ruts until I realized I just can't go any further in this car. Now, I don't have any video of the roughest parts of the road because I was just preoccupied by getting through it and getting out of it. It was really gnarly, and I didn't know if I was going to get stuck. At this point, I had already gone too far. There was no turnaround. So I ended up having to back out for a quarter mile along the same rutted road I came in on. The ruts were difficult enough going forward. They were downright dangerous going backwards. After I finally extricated myself from the situation, I realized I had fallen into a trap of my own creation. Had I encountered the rutted road early in my journey, I would have turned back immediately. But because I had already made this investment in this long road, I felt pressures on me to keep going. I obviously survived, but a situation like this could actually be fatal, and has been fatal. Imagine I had been in Death Valley. The famous Lost 49ers of Death Valley did exactly what I did. They followed a faulty map and when the trail got worse and worse, they refused to turn back for fear of losing their investment. What they nearly lost instead was their lives, as they ended up stranded in a place with no water. So it's not a trivial thing, but it also has some analogy in all sorts of other commitments. The further down a road you go, the harder it is to turn around and back out, both because of everything you have invested and because of the huge cost of retreating. For example, if you're involved in a romantic relationship and it really hasn't worked out from the very beginning, but you continue to support it and you continue to try to make it work and don't get out of it until 7 years later, that's probably a manifestation of the sunk cost fallacy. The more you invest, the more you don't want to give up your investment by quitting when you should have. So that's basically what this is all about, not quitting when you should have. And the more you think about it, the more you think about how this process works, the more you see how its tentacles extend into every aspect of your life. Even things like your political beliefs are shaped by the investments you've already made. And once you start making those investments, it's really hard to call it quits. So what happens when you've spent years of your life heading down the wrong road? A road that really isn't working out for you? Well, you could have a sudden epiphany and realize, oh my God, this isn't working, I've got to back out, I've got to change. And you retreat and you change course. But in practice, that doesn't really happen very often. In practice, when people start down a lifetime path, they just keep going, regardless of where it leads. They just keep going because they can't bear the thought, they can't bear the regret of knowing that they've made the wrong choice. So they keep going down this path, regardless of where it leads, and they twist their worldview around in such a way that it seems like the right road. And this is, to a large extent, is how political opinions are formed. You think that you're arriving at this political opinion, liberal or conservative, because you've rationally thought things out. But there's rational arguments on all sides. If you're investing in a political opinion, it probably means you have already made investments that political opinion supports. If you choose a certain religion is great for supporting whatever decisions you have already made. So this, to a large extent, is what restricts people's lives over the course of their lives. When you're a teenager, you can do anything. When you're 50 years old, you're not open to change because you've already accumulated all these investments and accumulated all these worldviews to support these investments. This is what makes people old. Now, there's obviously aging of the body that makes people old, but there's also a psychological aging of the mind that has nothing to do with biology. It has to do with the fact that over a course of your lifetime, you've invested in a lot of emotional things, and you can't bear to question any of those investments. So you invest also in some very restrictive worldviews that support your investments. So when you get to be in your 50s or 60s, you become set in your ways. That's a software problem. That's not really an aging problem. The fact is you've accumulated all these investments over the course of your lifetime, and you can't bear to accept the regret that you might have made a mistake. That's something that people are always running away from, something that they have great difficulty dealing with, and that's regret. The notion that I made a mistake, I made a horrible mistake and spent 15 years of my life doing something unproductive. People don't like to admit that. The only time they'll admit that is when some disaster comes along that totally crushes them, like a divorce. And then they realize, oh yeah, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe way back at the beginning of that path, maybe I made a mistake. But until that disaster comes along, people aren't usually open to it, and they just keep on plowing down that same road. So what are you going to do? I know nothing about you, but I know you have made some good investments and some bad investments. And the question is, are you going to have the courage to recognize those bad investments and back out of them before disaster makes the choice for you? You don't need disaster. You don't need a catastrophe to tell you what to do. You should be able to make that decision before catastrophe does. And these are tough decisions because it's not always clear what the difference between a good investment and a bad investment is. The only thing I can tell you is that you have to be blind to the past. What you did in the past, how you got to this point, how much you spent is completely irrelevant. All that matters is right now. What is the value of your asset right now, in the moment and in the future? That should be dictating whether you're going to continue this investment, whether you're going to continue to hold on to this object, and what sort of value you're going to give to it. That depends on what it is right now, not on how you got here. Yeah, so you're sitting at the poker table of life, and you've paid a lot to be sitting at this poker table, and you look at your hand and you got a bad hand. The question is, are you going to fold or are you going to double down? And the natural human impulse is, no matter what you've invested in, if it becomes under threat, you're going to double down. You know, you send 10,000 troops to Afghanistan and it's not working out, well, you're going to send 10,000 more troops to Afghanistan. That's the way the human impulse works. The question is, are you going to be smart enough to know when you've gone too far? And will you be able to back out when the right time comes?